Hey DIYers, today we're going to do some welding. Well, kind of welding, because we're not going to use an actual welder. Why? Well, because I don't have one, and two, I don't know how to use one or how to weld. Now I got a project coming up where I need to weld some aluminum tubing together, and I'm a DIYer and I'm cheap, and I don't want to pay for somebody to weld. So I had to find a workaround. Now, like everybody else, I went to YouTube for that research, and I found a way, well, I hope it's a way that I can do some welding without a welder and it'll hold up. And so because of that, not only are we going to do some welding of aluminum, we're also going to test and see how strong these welds are to see if it's even going to work. So what we're going to do is what I believe they call stick welding. And we're going to use these AlumiWeld welding rods right here and this little torch that I've got, handheld torch that's got MAP gas in it. And I'm using MAP gas because it's supposed to get hotter than the other type of gas that you can get. And you can get this at your Home Depot, Lowe's, or whatever kind of home center you have. It's very easy to find. Now this AlumiWeld, I got this, where else? Harbor Freight. Now stop. I did watch a video where a guy tested 7 or 8 different kinds of aluminum rods for welding. And he tested the melting points, he tested how easy it was, he tested the strength of it and everything. And actually this AlumiWeld came in pretty high on the list as far as melting where it says it's supposed to and having very good strength. Now these rods themselves, they're 8 in a package, they're 18 inches long. Don't remember how much I paid, but if I can find it, I'll put it down below here as we're talking. And it says these are supposed to have 40,000 pounds of PSI strength. Well, I don't have a way to test it to that much, but I do have kind of a crude way we're going to test and see if they hold up. It has a working temperature of 730 degrees. Now, as I said, I've done 0 welding in my life, none whatsoever. In fact, for this video, I didn't even practice ahead of time to try and get the hang of it. So during this video, you're going to see and experience any struggles I may or may not have when trying to learn how to do this welding procedure. And so because of that, we're going to find out, is it really as easy as they make it look in their videos? And if it's not, then we're going to wind up uncovering all those little details and nuances they just happen to leave out of their instructional video. So I'm just warning you now, this may not go as planned, and I may or most likely going to fail at my first attempt. And if I do, that's okay. I'm going to leave it in and let you see it. I mean, come on. Anytime you're trying to learn or do something new, it doesn't always go as planned. And if it doesn't go as planned, well, you're going to get to ride along with me while I try and figure out my mistakes and correct them and try and get this welding procedure to work, because I really do want this to work. But in the end, we might just prove that this isn't a viable welding method. We're all just going to have to go out and learn how to weld the old-fashioned way. In my case, I'm going to have to pay somebody to do it for me. So because I'm not sure how well this is going to go the first time around, this could be a really short video, or it could be a little bit longer of a video. I want you to stick around towards the end, because I got 3 experiments, whether this goes as planned or not, that I'm going to do, and I'll almost bet one of those you had never thought of. So what have I got here? I've got some round tubing, I've got some square tubing, I've got some aluminum angle iron, and some aluminum flat bar. Now this flat bar is an 1/8 inch thick. This steel tubing here is a 1/16 inch thick. This tubing here is 1/8 inch, and this angle iron is 1/16 inch. So I've got 7 different welds we're going to try out here. So the next thing I need to do is get some pieces cut so we can weld. And if you're wondering what this saw is I'm using to cut all this aluminum up, it's Evolution's 14-inch dual miter chop saw. So here are the 7 welds we're going to do. So we're going to take this square tubing and do 45, the angle and do a 45, the round bar and do a 45, flat bar do a 45. We're also going to take the flat bar and weld one in the middle here somewhere. We're going to take and do the flat bar and weld one on the side like this, and we're also going to take and weld one on the end like this. And we're going to test how strong they are. Now before I start any welding, I'm going to do some prep. Now if you've seen anybody do any welding or done any welding, which you know I haven't done any, but I've seen people do it, they'll actually kind of bevel the edges that they're welding together so that when they come together, it forms a little ditch, if you will, for the welding rod to go into. And I'm going to do the same thing with this metal file, as I'm just going to file a little beveled edge on all the surfaces that are going to weld together so that it gives it the best possible chance to hold. I'm also going to go around the edges of all the aluminum with a sander and 180 grit sandpaper and make sure it's good and clean. And when I'm done with that, I'm going to take some mineral spirits and clean it. And then we're going to do some welding. It might be overkill, I don't know. But I'm going to do everything I can or can think of. It's going to give me the best possible outcome. So let's start out with something easy. When I think it's hot enough, we'll give it a try. Nope, not yet. Now it's my understanding you just heat this up, and when it's hot enough, that rod should just melt. Nothing yet. Still nothing yet. Oh, there we go. There we go. Guess you gotta hold it a little longer. So that took a little longer than I thought it would to heat it up. All right, I'm gonna let this cool just a little bit, and we're gonna turn it over, and I'm gonna weld the backside. So I don't have a metal welding table or anything. I'm doing it on this wood. Yeah, it's gonna burn the wood a little bit, but I don't care. That's why I'm doing it on this. You can see I didn't get it set very well before it started to weld. That's okay, it's a test piece. We're gonna try and do it anyway, and hopefully I won't heat it up so much that that weld gives way and it falls apart. Now, one thing you're not supposed to do is once you get it welded is rinse it in cold water to cool it off. It says it will weaken the weld. Well, proved that point. So what I've learned so far from this first weld is, one, it takes a lot longer than I thought to heat that up. Two, you can't heat the other side up after you welded this side because it'll weaken your weld and it'll fall apart. So if you're going to weld both sides, you have to do it all at once. Three, you need some sort of metal surface to work on so you don't burn your place down if you do it on wood like I was. Four, this stays hot quite a bit longer than I thought. It's been a good 20 minutes and it's still too warm to touch there. I welded this side again. And then basically what I did is I did what they say you're not supposed to, is just use the torch to heat it up and weld through it. We'll see how good it is. So let's do another piece, and this time we're going to just weld it right on top of here like this. Be nice if you had some way to hold it so it's square, but I don't have a way. So this is what we're going to do. Now the worry is going to be is it's going to get so hot down here it's going to melt this loose. I don't know, let's find out. Well, I can tell you that sheet metal is not heavy enough to be torched. Let me do a little research. This isn't going as well as I thought. So I went and watched some more videos on this, and yes, you can't heat up the rod and do it. I knew that, but the thing is you've got to be able to have a way to keep heating the metal while you're using it. When I would heat it up, take it away, and then put the rod, it'd cool down too fast, believe it or not. And the other thing you got to be able to do is somehow to clamp it together. And so I rigged something up to clamp this together so that I could continuously put heat on it and get the rod in there and weld it. So I'm going to do that on this one. May ruin my vice grips, but it's the only thing I've got that's all metal that I can use this on. Now I can't see the flame, which would probably help so I know where the end of the hottest part of the flame is. We'll just do it like this and see what we get. And it takes a while to heat it up. It just dissipates that heat so fast, believe it or not, from what I was watching. So hot it melted my other one off. Now welded very straight or at all. So far this isn't working out too well, which is making it very disappointing. All right, I'm gonna move on to something that's maybe hopefully a little easier to hold, clamp down, and keep in position without having to do it with instruments. Got the angle iron, I got it clamped here. I've got this piece of wood here to hold it together. Sheet metal here has enough flex in it that it keeps that from being held tight. So I got this on here to keep the joint tight, and we'll give this a try. We're going to attempt to weld all this in one. Okay, that went a little better. Still not flat and even. That's going to be the hardest thing. All right, let's try this square tubing next. I'm going to take this board off and try and weld that backside now that it's kind of stuck together. Now here's the problem. Because I can't clamp these together and clamp them tight, it gets a gap. And then it gaps and I got to try and fill it. And I don't do a very good job of it. And then as I'm trying to fill it, more runs out. So we're going to leave that alone and we'll just test it like it is. It may suck big time, but we'll test it like it is. The most important part of all this that I found is you got to have a flat surface to work on. You got to have a way to clamp these pieces together so they stay tight as you're heating them up. Because I don't know if you noticed on that angle iron or on that square tubing, as I heated it up, it flexed to open and closed the gap. So you got to have a way to do that, and I really don't. But I've got this round tubing here we're going to do next. And I will tell you in the instructions when you read it, it says the more you practice, the better you get. Well, duh. As a first timer ever doing this, it's not quite as easy as they show in those videos, as you may well have seen. See what I mean? See how that gapped open like that? With this, you can't really braze a gap like you can in welding. You saw that thing moved all around on me. I'm gonna try and turn it over and do the other side, but I have a feeling it's not gonna work very well. There's a big gap here that it's not gonna fill. We'll let that cool, see what happens. All right, this is the last one we're gonna do, and that's this angle. I actually got this one clamped down, and it's in pretty good alignment, so I have high hopes this one's gonna turn out well. I'm gonna let that cool a little bit, the burning stop. I'm gonna flip it over and try and weld the other side. This one's gonna be our best one yet, I think. Well, just like all the others, I tried to flip over and weld, fell apart. When it got hot enough to melt, melted the other weld, fell apart. They make it look a whole lot easier in those videos than it really is. It's definitely not as easy as I thought. I didn't even try to re-put this back together. I just said, what the heck? So out of all this, I got 1, 2, 3, 4 welds we can try, and honestly only one of them's worth a snot, and that's this one. You know, this one here I only got to do one side and it's uneven. I said I was going to sand them, but I ain't sanding them when they're so uneven. This one I only got about half of it and it gaped open. And this one here, well, it wasn't holding anyway. Now I don't know as I can call this a failure on the weld as more as the welder itself. But the other thing they don't show you or tell you is you need good clamping to clamp your pieces together so it holds them together. You need a good flat surface and not this Mickey Mouse thing I got set up. But with what I've got, these 3 pieces here, let's at least test the strength on these and see what we get. So let's try this one, because if I can break it, it doesn't really matter. Oh, actually that one's pretty tight. This one might actually work. I'll clamp the short end. I have more leverage with the longer piece. It broke apart, but I have to tell you, and I'll show you, it looked like it ripped the aluminum. I mean, you can see it's a little distorted, but it actually ripped this piece of aluminum out versus the weld. If I had a good weld on there, it might actually work real good. And I consider it a failure if I can pull it apart by hand, because I imagine if you actually welded a piece of metal this crappy, it'd probably be pretty hard to pull apart. So I'm gonna call it a failure. All right, let's see what this one does. And I'll say this is probably my best one. I have high hopes. Well, I like that. It's just bending the aluminum. Let me get a hammer. I would call that a huge success. I mean, I've just about bent it clean over. It's bending up where the weld was. It's bending right along the weld. I don't see any fractures of the weld. That proves it works to me. All right, let's set up and try this piece of angle. Well, that didn't work. It ripped right along. Well, actually, before it broke, it actually bent. So I had it well welded here. The rest of this sucked. So with the one weld, and actually is what, the second and third one I did it on both sides. It held very, very well. So what I'm gonna need to use this for, if I can get both sides welded like this, it's gonna work and work well. This weld did so well. Let's see what happens when I try to bend it back. Does it break? Does it stay in place? Does it crack? What happens? Yep, it snaps. So it can't take this kind of pressure without snapping, whereas if you actually welded it, it would. The fact that I could bend it clear over and bend it back about halfway before it breaks, still calling it a success. And there's still probably some user error in here somewhere. Now these others failed miserably, and honestly it's user error. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna take the tubular, the angle, and the square tubing. I'm gonna recut them. I'm gonna get some actual welding clamps to put these in so it'll hold them together. And I'm gonna weld them. and then we'll test. Because if this works like this, and I can get a good weld on these, I'm suspecting this is gonna work. But I gotta know, and you gotta know too. So let me get all these set up. I'm gonna have to order a clamp, and we'll finish this video up. Okay, got all my pieces recut, sanded, filed, cleaned up, ready to go. Got me 2 right angle welding clamps. I got a couple pieces clamped up in those. I got a couple welding C-clamps if I need them. And I also got 2 12 by 12 1/4-inch thick plates of steel. And I have that because I want to set all this on top of there and heat it up on there, so I'll try not to burn and catch fire my wooden table here. So I'm hoping with that it'll dissipate the heat, and if anything, maybe I get a little black smoking to it, but I don't catch it on fire. So I'm going to try and weld this outside edge and this top edge. With it being shady, I can actually see the flame now. I might be able to better control it. And this thing is dissipating the heat so much I can't even get it hot enough to melt the rod. Well, I finally got it hot enough to melt, and I almost kind of had to just set the torch right on there and let it get hot in one spot and then just move it forward with the rod. So we're going to flip this over and try and show you on the other side. Basically, I had to get it hot, and I melted the rod into it, then I just went back over it with the flame to try and melt it down in there. I don't know how well we did, but I think it knocked out my bottom weld. This is just not as easy as they make it look. But I've got to try and get a weld on that other side. So I set the clamp down on the ground. I got it just on the plate itself, which is a little warm. I got the welded side down. I'm trying to get this side. Might be a little harder to dissipate the heat with it sitting right on the metal plate. I think I found the trick. Not sure, but I think. Well, it's not a very pretty weld, but it's welded. Let's try this angle piece. I think the trick is yes, I've got to get the metal very, very hot. I may be trying to get it too hot. What I was trying to do is get it hot and just touch it on there, but it's dissipating the heat so fast and so quick, I can't. So I'm just gonna concentrate the torch on there and get the metal really hot, heat the rod along the hot metal and set it in there, and we'll see how well it works. When I say see how well it works, I mean how strong is it. That seems to work. Well, there again, not the prettiest of welds. We'll let this cool with the other one, see how strong it is, and hope it passes. Meantime, let's do the round piece. And this has a little bit of room. It can clamp 2 different size pieces of metal. There, don't need to be very tight, just tight enough to hold it in place. It must be getting better. That looks really good. So I went ahead and welded this piece together because, I mean, you see me do enough of them. I don't think you need to see me do one more. And this one actually turned out really well. So the flat steel turns out pretty good. So here's kind of what I found. So when I'm first doing the weld and there's nothing on here, I heat this metal up really, really hot to the point where if I stick that welding rod on there, it'll start to melt. Now the aluminum dissipates the heat so well, and it's kind of a cool day. It's only about 55 degrees. And so I got it to where it starts to melt, and then basically I use the torch to kind of heat the metal and the welding rod up together and do it. And then when I go to do the other side, the trick that I found is you got to heat the metal up, because if it's cold, it doesn't want to stick. Not to the point where it melts your other weld. That's the trick, and that's the hard thing. So I just kind of heat it up to what I think, and then I basically stick the welding rod in there and just run the torch right along the metal, right with the welding rod, and just let it melt in there. After I've done that, I kind of go back and rub through it to get some of the oxide layer to come up to the top. Now the question is will it pass the strength test? I mean, as I sit here like this, it's okay. I don't want to do any more than that, I'm afraid. But let me show you the first surprise I was going to show you. And yes, I know it's going to fail, but we're going to do it anyway. So basically I got tubular steel, square tubular steel in here. I did the same thing. I filed the edges, I sanded and cleaned it. I'm going to stick it on here. No, it doesn't stick to this surface, but there's kind of an oil on here. So we'll see if it sticks any better with it being cleaned off. We'll let that cool and see what happens. Okay, this is cooled enough. Let's see what happens. Well, I had to do it. I just had to do it. I knew it was going to fail, especially when I saw it wasn't sticking to this metal. But you know, everybody out there wanted to see it. So here's the other thing I was thinking of. I've got a heat gun that gets to 1050. This rod only needs to get to 730 degrees. So can I heat that metal enough, get it hot enough with the heat gun, and still weld this with this rod? Because that could be an alternate way of doing it and not have to get one of these little propane torches if you already got a heat gun. First, let's test if it gets hot enough to melt this rod. Well, I guess there's our answer. It's not gonna work. 'Cause I got it up as high as it'll go. Heat gun's not enough. Well, that was a bust. I was honestly hoping that would work. I'm not even gonna bother sanding, because I'm gonna tell you right now, I tried taking 80 grit sandpaper to this weld, and it doesn't even touch it, which means I'm gonna have to use a grinder. If it doesn't pass a strength test unsanded, well, it ain't gonna pass it sanded. Moment of truth. Oh, actually, I'm a little scared. This one I haven't best decided how to do it, because I really can't clamp it and try and pull this way, but I can tell you, I can't pull it apart by myself. All right, let's try the angle iron first. Here we go. This one. Nope. Well, this method is a bust. Now I will say on this angle iron, must have done something good here, because I've bent it all the way to straight. It's bent it and it hasn't broken loose yet. Maybe it's technique. I don't know. So here's what I've learned. Definitely not as easy as they make it look. And there's clearly something, a technique of some sort that I'm missing when I'm doing this to get this to work. All the videos I saw, when they did it and did the strength test, it held. It held really well. That wasn't very strong at all. I mean, this was the only one that held at this end. And was it because I got it hotter? I don't know. Do you really got to get that metal really, really melting hot before you put the rod on there? I don't know. The problem is, though, is you only get to do one side of the weld if you do that. When you go do the other side, it's going to melt this one out. And there's no real good way to do this side and this side at the same time. So I don't know what the answer is there. Maybe try this side and this side, let it cool, and then do this. I don't know. This one held up decent doing this, but it still broke. The only one that really worked was the one where I used that flat bar and bent it all the way over. That one worked really well. To me, I'm gonna call it a bust. I am gonna play with this a little more and see if it is just a technique thing, because if it is just a technique thing, okay, great. Somebody needs to say that in them videos. I'm gonna have to find somebody to TIG weld or MIG weld some aluminum for me. So the metal plates did their job. It didn't burn the table. That worked well. These clamps worked really well. At least that part of the project worked out. And I'm really bummed this failed, because I really don't want to pay somebody to do some welding. Wait. I think I got it figured out. So I took and I didn't do anything but sand and clean and welded this piece on the end here, clamped it in after it was cooled, and it took a lot more to pull and break this apart. Yes, it broke it apart, but in the process, it also bent this. I didn't just stand there and did it. I actually had to brace and pull, and I re-welded this that was already broken. I just took, melted everything up and re-welded it. And yes, it broke, but you see how much it bent it in order to do it? What did I do different? So I took out my Klein infrared thermometer and was taking readings at the metal with the torch on it. And I wasn't getting it hot enough in order to melt the rock. I could sit there and hold it on there, and it wasn't getting it hot enough with this old tip. Now this is the Benzomatic TS4000. And so I thought maybe if I had a tip that coned better, it'd get the metal hotter and work. And you can't just melt this onto the cold metal and get it to work. I did the next thing I could do, and that's went out and got a Benzomatic TS8000. It's supposed to have a hotter, better tip on it, and it does. It got the metal a lot hotter. With the old tip, I was getting around 350 or so. With this one, I got over 500 degrees, and it was way more than enough to just set this on there. And actually, I could take the torch away while I sit here and did this and get it to stay melting, which I couldn't do before. And so I'm going to cut some of these up, and I'm going to try this theory out one more time. Please let it work this time, because I am really going to be bummed if it's not. Oh, and just so you know, I left the torch on there about 15 seconds before I took each one of those measurements, so it would be an even test. And what you're going to see me do is I'm going to do the top first. Before I was trying to do the top and side, I'm just going to do the top first. I'm going to start off by holding the torch dead in the center and getting that hot. Then I'll kind of move back and forth, and you'll see from there. And I've got this dial turned all the way up. That second one was a little better example. But you can see it got hot, and I was able to just take the torch away and kind of run the stick up and down, because you want to get underneath that shiny silver stuff, because that shiny silver stuff is your oxide layer, and you want to get underneath that so you get a good weld. It wasn't quite as good up here, but I was able to get it done. Now, it still took a fair bit of time to get this hot enough to start doing its thing. But once I got it there, it worked pretty good. I'm hoping that's the trick. And like I say, I beveled everything. So I'm gonna do the rest of these. Y'all don't need to see me do that. You've saw me do it enough times, and this is how I'm gonna do all the others. So I'll get these all welded up, cooled off, and we'll stress test them again. And with this square tubing, I got a pretty good weld on this side here and the end, but it comes to the bottom side and the inside corner. It looks kind of ugly, but the tubular aluminum welded really well. Now this big blob, well, that's because I didn't realize, but I held the torch in one spot for too long, and it actually started melting this aluminum. I couldn't do that with that other tip, that TS4000. It wouldn't do that. I honestly didn't know that this one would do it until it did. So I did a test piece. As you can see here, I'm holding the torch on this piece of aluminum, and then it suddenly starts to melt. Now, what is the melting point of aluminum, you might ask? Well, I looked it up. It's 1221 degrees or 660 degrees Celsius. So I got a really good weld on this. The only place it's going to be kind of weak is right there where I melted it, because I can, from the inside, I can see that there's a little hole. The one that got the best weld and did the easiest is this angle iron. Now, because that torch is able to get hot like it does, it's able to actually heat this whole piece. And so when I go to weld, I could weld this whole thing in one big swoop and actually come out on the outside, give it just a little bit of heat, and weld this side. The square tubing of aluminum, it doesn't seem to do that as well. I did it here, heated this up, and then immediately moved over to this side to see if it would do that. And no, I had to heat this up for a little bit. So for some reason on the square tubing, it doesn't heat it up as nice. Could be user error too. I'm actually kind of excited to do this strength test because I think it's going to do well. So let's just do the pull test by hand. Nope. I could pull it apart by hand last time, especially on this. I can actually feel it flexing. This one's going to be a little tougher because I can't really get a good grip on it. But it's not moving either. I realize that this weld, this type of welding, if you call it, is never going to be as strong as if you actually weld the aluminum with a MIG welder or a TIG welder or acetylene or whatever. With this type of welding, you don't get that great penetration through because it doesn't melt the aluminum unless you do like this. That's why I file and angle those edges so I've got a V, so I've got more surface area for this stuff to hang on to hopefully make it stronger. So in no means am I saying this is going to be a structural hold up to 40,000 pounds of force, no. But I think definitely for what I'm going to need it for, it's going to do well. If you just need something that's kind of lightweight and doesn't have to take a lot of brute force, I think this is a good way to do it, if my strength test works. Remember last time I barely pulled on this thing and it snapped. And this one kind of broke in my hand. So I know they're gonna break, but it's how hard do I gotta pull on it to do it. And don't go anywhere. I figured out another little surprise I wanna show you. See if mine works better than theirs did. So let's do the square tubing first. Grab a hold. Holy shit. Oops, holy crap. That ain't breaking. I know you might think I'm faking it, but tell you what, let me move it over so I get a little more grip. I know I'm putting at least 100 pounds of force on there. I'm going to be bold and say 200. But this, that's going to be plenty strong for what I need. I am beyond thrilled because now I know what I need to use it for is going to work. This one might be a little easier because, well, I melted part of the aluminum, and which weakened it. Well, we'll see. Same thing here. It's giving way. If I yank on it some more, it will. But I almost wish I was doing my project in round tubing, but I got to do it in square tubing. This test is working. Oh my gosh, this is working. You can see where it pulled apart. Didn't even rip apart where I melted it. But it actually caused the aluminum to distort. Here we go. Well, it broke loose and it bent right here in the corner. Now this was a little easier to do than what these were, but that held up well. And actually it ripped the aluminum. That's impressive. All right, last thing, I promise. Now, in all the other videos I saw and watched on doing this technique, they all took something and made basically a cup, if you will, poured water in it to see if it held water. All theirs leaked. Now, granted, I tried really hard to get mine so it didn't have any holes in it. So we'll see if mine's gonna hold any water. And I will say, when you're welding this for that purpose, you've got to be really careful because it's easy to get little bitty pinholes. And I didn't weld on the inside to cheat. Oh, mine's got a leak too, right there. Little bitty leak. So what's that tell you? Well, I guess you can't weld these to where they're waterproof. So what is the takeaway or the big message from this little demonstration video? One, first and foremost, is your torch head. And it makes a huge difference which kind of torch head you have on your tank. Like I said, this TS4000, it'll work for, say, doing copper, sweating copper, because that's what I've used it for. But for something like this, it just didn't get hot enough, as you saw. Now, I've held this torch head on the aluminum tubing before during this video for quite a while, just as long as I did this one, and it wouldn't get it that hot to melt it. Torch head makes a definite difference. It's got to get this metal hot. You can't, what I would say, cold weld, meaning kind of warm it up, but use your torch to melt your welding rod to join it together, because it doesn't stick. It's got to be, the metal's got to be hot enough that it melts the rod. Now, I will tell you, in those videos I watched, they had little special torches that would kind of cone the flame down to a point, and it may be that that's how they get an even hotter, quicker temp than I do. This one, I thought this one was going to do it, but it doesn't. But it gets it there. It still takes a little bit of time, not as long as this, obviously, but it still takes a little time to do it. Now, some other things they don't tell you about in those videos. This is harder than they make it look. Now, I will tell you, just messing around doing what I've done, I have gotten better and quicker at it, but it's not quite so easy as they make it look. So if you're going to do this, do like I have and get some scrap pieces and practice on it for a little bit before you do your real work, because it'll pay off. Yeah, some of these welds look ugly, but some of them are starting to look really good. I only saw one video where they really told you that you got to heat the metal up and not the rod. The rest of them just kind of do it. And the other thing is as you saw in some of those, I went down under the puddle and raked it back and forth. And it helps break up the oxide layer, because it's the oxide layer doesn't give you your strength. So you got to get it below that. And what I did on these, and I think that's why I got a better result. Whereas before I was kind of heating it up. The metal wasn't getting very hot, and I was heating the metal and the rod at the same time. And well, you saw what an epic failure that was. Fortunately, you might have to invest in some equipment. Having these metal plates to do it on and these angle clamps, game changer for this, because it held them together, it held them tight so you could weld. When I was doing it before, it wouldn't hold them together tight. And when you heat it up, you can actually see the metal flexing and stuff. Like on this one here, when I had it in the clamp before I heated it up, I had a little bitty gap. By the time I heated it up, there was no gap. Don't want a gap when you go to weld, because this doesn't do a good job of bridging a gap. And one other important thing, if you're like me, you do most of your work with wood and things like that, you don't work with metal. So when you cut your wood and do stuff with it, you're used to grabbing it and it's fine, it don't get hot and burn you. Well, I burnt my fingers 3 or 4 times doing this whole video, because I would do my welding or whatever and forget it's hot and go to reach for it, because I'm not used to working with metal. So if you're not used to working with metal, be careful of that. And the other thing that I would say you really kind of need is you need to have some way to cut your metal if you're going to do 45s and angles, that you get really good cuts so that they do line up well when you clamp them in, so they weld well. And that saw I used at the beginning of this video did a most excellent job of that. It's the Evolution's S355 MCS if you're interested. And if you like that saw, want to see a very, very comprehensive review of it and how it works, then click on this link right here and it'll take you to the video where I do a good review of this tool. And there's also a 10% discount code if you want to buy one. And if any of you out there have done this type of welding in a project, let me know how it worked out for you. So until next time, happy DIYing.